Namo Butsu. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are, whichever realms of existence you are, whatever mind states you're in, whatever conditions you're in, you are welcome here. So, thanks for joining me. And today I wanted to do something a bit different in continuing my reflective reading series. And this is again a preface to some videos in the or to prepare for videos that I want to do in my Bamboo in Daily Life series with Kyokan, regarding how to live kind of in Mapo. And it's one of the specific guidelines that both Shinran and Renyo refer us to for how to live in Mapo and how we should be conducting ourselves in that because we do live in Mapo. There's no precepts. There's no, we can't really grasp the precepts because of it just does the capacity of beings in Mapo as Bamboo. We just can't grasp we just don't have the capacity to really grasp what the precepts are about, nor do we have the capacity to put them into practice. And even if we did, it would be poisoned. And even if it was good, it would still be poison good. So so there's essentially no precepts for us in Mapo. So, actually Honen, Shinran, and Renyo all have given kind of guidelines for how we should live. And one of the ones that is referred to, I think, by both Shinran and Renyo, I think refers to Shinran, referring to them, is the principles of humanity, propriety, justice, etc. The basis, basically the 5 principles of Confucianism. So what I want to do today is to read, and I think before we get into those 5 principles, I found 2 papers basically to read. One's an introduction to Confucianism in general, because I think it's important, though I'm not promoting Confucianism as a religion or a lifestyle or anything, because I'm a Jodo Shinshu Buddhist, but I think it's important to have the context of what that's about, because I think that was part of the culture at the time. That it still is part of the culture in China and in Japan. It's still very much in the fabric of the culture itself. And so that was, part of the culture, part of the context of when Shinran lived and Renyu lived in a very strong way. So I just think if we're going to, if we're using those guidelines, it's important to kind of have the context of Confucianism, because they would have been living in it. They would have been living in the context of Confucianism at the time. We do not. We live in very, especially in the West, very modernized, westernized, very individualism. The principle. We're very far from the principles of Confucianism. Although I think successful societies in modern times, the more they kind of embrace some of the aspects of Confucianism, the more successful those societies tend to be. So, and these are very old principles, from China. Actually, China has some very good, philosophical, human realm governance principles in their art and culture and philosophy that are very practical for us and very successful, I think. And that is still used in China to this day. But anyway, so let's not get too far into that. But anyway, so that's what I want to do. I think it's important to have the context for this. So that's what I'm going to do is going to read. I found 2 papers, one on the principles themselves and a paper that's an introduction to Confucianism. So I'm going to read the introduction to Confucianism paper first, and then in another video read the other, or maybe might take more than one video to do the first paper especially. Might take more than one to do the other paper as well. But anyway, so that's what I'm going to do. So I'm going to share my screen right now with you. And here we go. So this is the Introduction to Confucianism paper that I'm using. It's by Xinzhong Yao of the University of Wales, Lampeter. Apologies if I have not pronounced that very well or well at all. It's done through Cambridge Press, University Press, and there you can see all the copyright, everything. I'm just using this as fair use. This is not for profit. This is not for anything. I'm not affiliated with Cambridge Press or anything like that, and I'm not promoting Cambridge Press or anything like that. This is just using it for educational purposes, fair use. There we go, table of contents. So, all right. Okay, so Confucianism, Confucius, and Confucian classics. So about 2,500 years ago, a man was born to a once aristocratic family in a small state called Lu in East China. During his lifetime, the man endeavored to work towards a goal. During his lifetime, the man endeavored to work, quote, towards a goal, the realization of which he knows to be hopeless, unquote. That's from Lampeter, 1438. So let me read that again. I won't. In the future, I'm not going to re-quote this, quote that. You can see it on the screen for yourself because I'm sharing it. So, all right. So, start again. About 2,500 years ago, a man was born to a once aristocratic family in a small state called Lu in East China. During his lifetime, the man endeavored to work towards a goal, the realization of which he knows to be hopeless, carrying forward the old tradition in a chaotic environment and opening up a new horizon in a dark age. By the time he died at the age of 73, his teachings had spread throughout the state and beyond. His disciples and students compared him to the sun and moon, while his rivals considered him a man who does not work with his arms and legs, who does not know how to distinguish between different kinds of grain. But there was one thing that neither side knew, that Chinese culture, to some extent, East Asian culture, and to some extent, East Asian culture, would be forever linked with his name. And that tradition, and that the tradition he loved and transmitted would rank with the greatest in the world. Indeed, indeed. This tradition is known in the West as Confucianism. Okay. So Confucianism and Ru. The origin of the word Confucianism may be traced back to the Jesuits of the 16th century. Until Nicholas Trigault published his version in Ricci's journals in 1615, there was hardly any knowledge of, not to say debate about Confucianism. The Jesuits were virtually the first Europeans to discover Confucius and Confucianism, the sect of the literati, as they not inaccurately called it. The Jesuits, representatives of European values and intellectual methods, attempted to understand Chinese intellectual life in terms of systems, and transmuted the tradition of the that's Ju, or Chinese scholars into Confucianism. So that's from Rule 1986, I think chapter 2, page 195, I think. Anyway, so Since then, Confucianism or its equivalents in other European languages has been taken in the West as a proper name for the East Asian tradition, with Confucius as its fountainhead. In fact, what is meant by Confucianism is more a tradition generally rooted in Chinese culture and nurtured by Confucius and Confucians, rather than a new religion created or a new value system initiated by Confucius himself alone. It is true that as a distinctive school, Confucianism began with Confucius. It was Confucius who it was Confucius who explored deeply and elaborately. It was Confucius who explored deeply and elaborated extensively on the basic principles of what was to become Confucianism. And it was Confucius and his disciples who succeeded in transmitting and transforming their ancient culture. But it would go too far to suggest that Confucianism was created solely by Confucius and Confucianism was but it would go too far to suggest that Confucianism was created solely by Confucius and Confucianism was sustained exclusively by the faith in Confucius. In this sense, the word Confucianism is a misnomer for the tradition that is normally referred to as Ru Jai or Ru Jiao, Ru Zhu, or simply as Ru in China and other East Asian countries. Confucius played a key role in the development of the tradition, which has originated long before his time. He is usually regarded as a sage teacher for the people, or as sage for Confucians, but seldom as the savior, never as the Lord. Confucius functioned as the founder of the Confucian tradition in a way quite different from the founders of other religious traditions. So that's really important. This is not a religion that we're talking about. This is a cultural kind of principles, a set of cultural principles, a philosophy, a way to live within society and in the world under heaven, things like that. Ru and the Ru tradition. Ru Jai, Ru Jiao, or Ru Zhu may be translated roughly as the doctrine or tradition of scholars. To understand the nature of this doctrine or tradition, we have to explore its root in Ru. A prominent scholar of the Han Dynasty, 206 BCE to 220 CE, Liu Xin, don't know the birth date until 23 of the Common Era, located, let me just start that again. To understand the nature of this doctrine or tradition, we have to first explore its root in Ru. A prominent scholar of the Han Dynasty, Liu Xin, located the formation of Ru as a profession in the early years of the Zhao dynasty. That was 1100 to 256 BCE, and asserted that Ru was characteristic of its devotion to the six classics, that being the book of poetry, the book of history, the book of rites, the book of music, the book of changes, and the spring and autumn annuals. And that a social group and distinctive school, and that as a social and a distinctive school, Ru emphasized the virtues of humaneness, Ren or Zhen, and righteousness, Yi, followed the ancient sage kings and took Confucius as their master. However, I'm just not going to read all the dates and everything. It just disrupts the flow of the conversation. This isn't any kind of, sacred text or anything. So I'm just not, you can see it on the screen yourself. So, however, the identification of Ru with Confucian scholars was not recognized until much later, when Confucianism had been discovered as a prominent school, with its scholars engaging with the classics in the way of ancient sages. What then is the original meaning of Ru? Among ancient texts, the character Ru first occurs in the Analects, where Confucius taught his disciples to be a Ru of virtuous gentlemen, Junzi Ru, and not a morally deficient man or vulgar Ru, Zaoren Ru. Some scholars, both Chinese and Western, argue that although groups of men professionally skilled in ceremonial practice existed prior to Confucius' time, the character Ru postdated Confucius' time and was in fact coined as a name for the followers of Confucius. While we cannot engage in this debate, suffice it now to say, while we cannot engage in debate, suffice it now to say that there is no reason for us to disregard what is implied by the reference to the two kinds of Ru in the Analects, and we have grounds for believing that as a profession or a distinctive group in society, Ru must have predated the time of Confucius. So these are, things that some of these principles, that Confucius kind of codified and brought into, his philosophy and into the world in the way he did, were things that kind of pre-existed, were already there, or kind of almost, in a sense, you'll see in Confucianism, it's kind of, these are things that are natural to the human realm, and from our perspective, the Buddha is assuming that humans aren't completely ruled by the lower realms, like the lower Azuric realm or the animal realm or the ghost realm or the hell realms. If humans are ruled by them, then the five principles that we'll be eventually talking about aren't natural. That's a human there. But if someone's solidly kind of in the human realm, or has aid to be or enable to be, in the case of us, Dodo Shinju Buddhists who are, in the embrace of Amida, enabled by Amida, then these things, are natural to the human behavior. Anyway, so the human realms. So anyway, let me come back to this now. Where was I? So predated the time of Confucius. It's over here. As mentioned above, Lu Xun gave a clear explanation of the origin of Ru. He traced the origin of Ru to a government office, Situ Ji Guan Ministry of Education, whose function was to assist the ruler to follow the way of the yin yang and to enlighten the people by education. Zhu Renjun Shun Yin Yang Ming Jiao Hao. Sorry about my pronunciations there of that. But so he traced the origin of Ru to a government office or Ministry of Education, whose function was to assist the ruler to follow the way of the yin yang and to enlighten the people by education. So this is, there's when you hear of the word Taoism, there's a broader tradition to Taoism. It embraces a lot of things, not just what people think of as philosophical Taoism or folk Taoism or, following the Tao or, Lao Tzu or Shuangzi or, that's part of the tradition of Taoism, but there's a broader tradition in Chinese culture and history. It's one of the most ancient traditions, actually, or spiritual views, I guess you could call it, of the world. And Confucianism is very much part of, is a Taoic philosophy, or a Taoic way of life, or it's part of that tradition. So that's what this is kind of referring to here. So anyway, so continuing, there seem to have been few debates concerning the meaning of Ru before the 20th century, and people generally accepted Liu Xin's explanation. Following the introduction of a Western scientific methodology at the beginning of the 20th century, however, Chinese scholars started to rethink the character Ru and reassess its meanings and connotations. A group of scholars followed Liu Xin to confirm that Ru was indeed from a government office. Was indeed from a government office. Lost my place. Sorry. Apologies, just for one moment. Okay, yeah, sorry. So following the introduction of a Western, so here we are, I'll just point to it. Following the introduction of a Western scientific methodology at the beginning of the 20th century, however, Chinese scholars started to rethink the character Ru and reassess its meanings and connotations. A group of scholars followed Liu Xin to confirm that Ru was indeed a government office. Zhang Binglin, for example, that was Zhang Binlin they lived 1869 to 1936, for example, argued that all the schools which came into being during the period of the spring and autumn, 771 to 476 BCE, and the warring states, and the period of the warring states, 475 to 221 BCE, originated from the imperial offices of the Zhao dynasty. In his article from the imperial, in his article, Yuan Ru, Exploring the Origins of Ru, Zhang pointed out that in ancient times, Ru was a general term with a range of references, and that there were three kinds of Ru in the Zhao dynasty. Ru as a distinguished title for intellectuals or gentlemen who were equipped with skills and expertise in one or more areas of social life, Shuxi. Ru as a classification for those who were professionals in the six arts, rites, music, archery, carriage, driving, history, and mathematics, and Ru as an official title for those who have assisted the ruler in following the way of yin yang and to enlighten the people by education. Excuse me. A sip of coffee here. Or a bit more than a sip. Anyway, Zhang believed that the three kinds of Ru were later disregarded, and Ru as a general term became a specific name for those who taught and transmitted the Confucian classics. Other modern scholars, such as Kang Yao Wei, 1858 to 1927, and Hu Shi, 1891 to 1962, disagreed with Liu and Zhang and Zhu and Zhang with regard to the origin of Ru. For them, Ru did not originate in a government office of the Zhao dynasty. Based on the records that Confucian usually wore a special cap, Zhengfu Ji Guan, Hu Shi claimed that Ru referred to the adherents referred to the adherents, Yimen, of the Shang dynasty, circa 1600 to circa 1100 BCE. Somebody received me that again. So based on the records of the Confucian, based on the records that Confucius usually wore a special count, she claimed that Ru referred to the adherents of the Shang dynasty, who, because of their expertise in religious rituals, were employed by priests by the Zhao dynasty. When the Western Zhao dynasty, 1100 to 770 BCE, declined shortly before the time of Confucius, these professionals lost their privilege and social status and became a group of people who lived on their knowledge and skills in rituals and ceremonies. In his Yuan Yu Mo, The Origins of the Ru and Moists, Fu Yulan argued against this assumption that wearing the Shang cap did not mean that these people were adherents of the Shang. Feng further separated Ru Jai, the former being a professional group who lived on education and performed rituals, the latter being a distinctive school established in the spring and autumn period. Most of the debates were concentrated on the immediate predecessors of Ru that later tradition knew as Confucian scholars. Whether or not it was associated with a government office, the members of Ru were certainly associated with learning and education. But what was their original profession? Recently, a number of Chinese scholars have returned to the question. Some conclude that as a profession, Ru refers originally to dancers and musicians in religious ceremonies of the Shang dynasty when the worship of spirits and gods dominated the life of the people. A Ru would perform various dances and play music as imprecation for, I don't know if I'm pronouncing that word correctly, a Ru would perform various dances and play music as imprecation for a good harvest and as offerings to gods and ancestors, and would lead ceremonies for the coming of rain during the seasons of drought. So you can kind of see why that gets affiliated with Confucianism, or is it, you can see why people confuse it that it was somehow a religion. But anyway, to fulfill their duties, Ru, not to say that the religions, it didn't get turned into religions through folk means. There's many folk religions that have Confucianism as a basis. But anyway, to fulfill their duties, Ru had to study not only the rituals proper, but also other relevant subjects such as astronomy, astrology, astronomy/astrology to predict rain or drought. The character Ru is said to come from the character Zhu. Zhu was composed of two parts: cloud above sky. So two parts were cloud, and then above sky was the other part, which reveals the relation of Ru to ritual dance and rain praying. The oracle bone inscriptions, in the oracle bone inscriptions, Zhu was rendered as a man who is in a shower, suggesting a ritual ablution before a Ru went about his responsibilities. In chapter 38, the conduct of scholars of the Book of Rites, we can see the importance of bathing for a Confucian scholar. The scholar keeps his person free from, and this is a quote from that book, the scholar keeps his person free from stain and continually bathes and refreshes his virtue. So there could be some symbolism to that as well, to the ritual bathing, cleansing. Other etymological connections also suggest that Ru were related to ritual dance, music, and religious ceremonies. The character Ru shares the same root with those for weaklings and cowards, indicating that the members of Ru were characterized by their softness, suppleness, and flexibility. Probably for this season. Wow. Sorry, it's pretty early in the morning when I'm doing this. Starting out. So probably for this reason, Zhu Shen, the first Chinese philologist, defined it as such. So read that again. Probably for this reason, Zhu Shen, the first Chinese philologist, defined it as such. Ru means soft. It is the title for Confucian scholars, Fuxi, who educated the people with the 6 arts. Therefore, Ru was gentle and yielding rather than competitive and commanding. In contrast to a warrior who was known for his vigor in war and in competition. As a master of music and dance, the Ru was clearly aware of his own refinement and manners, and believed his own worth to reside in his cultivated and noble etiquette. It was this which served to distinguish the Ru from common people, such as farmers, craftsmen, and merchants. To summarize and assess what has been presented above, we may hypothesize that the different explanations of the origins of Ru might actually refer to the different periods in the evolution of groups of men who were called Ru. The Ru went through a number of stages before the time of Confucius. Firstly, Ru referred to dancers and musicians in religious rituals who were characterized by their softness and flexibility. It's already stated. At this stage, Ru was a special group in society whose members were roughly equivalent to what we mean as shamans, magicians, or sorcerers. Not sure about that. Anyway, secondly, Ru were masters of rituals and ceremonies who performed or assisted the performance of various rituals. At this stage, Ru referred to professionals expert in religious rituals, rites, and ceremonies. Thirdly, ritual masters became teachers in official education. To be able to look after rituals, Ru must have mastered history, poetry, music, astrology, archery, and mathematics, which were closely related to rituals in ancient times. As experts in these areas, they exercised responsibility for training young dancers, musicians, and performers, and for teaching on rituals and ritual-related subjects, which earned them the title of Shi, or masters/teachers. Although they were still employed as professional priests or assistants at official or non-official ceremonies. Along with the decline of cultic practices and the rise of rationalism during the spring and autumn period, large numbers of Ru departed from the official assigned profession. Excuse me, sorry, I'm a bit of a head cold. Let's start again. Along with the decline of the cultic practices and rise of rationalism during the spring and autumn period, a large number of Ru departed from the officially assigned profession and entered various areas of social life. The Ru became distinctive for their skills in state rituals and in official and private education. Character Ru was gradually extended to become a specific term for those who had skills of ritual, history, poetry, music, mathematics, art, and archery, and who lived off their knowledge of all kinds of ceremonies and other subjects. Among the teachers of these disciples, Confucius stood out as an outstanding Ru of his time and opened up a new course by developing and transforming the Ru tradition. By the time of the Warring States period, Confucius had been recognized as the highest figure in the Ru tradition, as indicated by Han Fei. That's 280 approximately to 233 BCE. A leading legalist philosopher and a well-known critic of Confucianism. So there's a quote here. I think he's quoting, or it's quoting him. In the present age, the celebrities for learning are the literati, Ru, and the Mohists. The highest figure of the literati was Kung Chiu, or Kong Chiu. The highest figure of the Mohist was Mo Ti. And that was end of the quote there. So obviously, Kyung Chiu or Kong Chiu is Confucius. Not long after that, the tradition of Ru was totally identified with the doctrines clarified, elaborated, and propagated by Confucius, and the quote rituals of the Ru, unquote, and the quote way of Confucius, unquote, became interchangeable in a collection of the former Han dynasty, One way or another, Confucius' transmission and interpretation of the ancient culture and his practices of education played a major part in shaping and reshaping the Ru tradition. The process involved in this transformation must be taken into account when we discuss the relationship between Confucius and Ru. Therefore, whatever method one may employ tracing the origin of Confucianism, one must take into account both the cultural heritage on which Confucius worked and the transformation Confucius made to the Ru tradition. In this sense, it is misleading to simply characterize Confucius and his followers through their role as masters of dance. That was a quote from Enno. As we have pointed out above, by the time of Confucius, the Ru, I'm not going to be trying to do all the referencing and things because that's just too disruptive. You can see it on the screen for yourself as you read along. As we have pointed out above, by the time of Confucius, the Ru fundamentally changed their social and cultural functions and therefore should not be treated in the same way as the earlier masters of dance and music.